I've been a reporter for 37, and I from California. I'm living in Nashville at the moment. We're living in Nashville at the moment, but really from California. I spent I I started my journalism career with really the greatest job I ever had was as a crime reporter in Stockton, California, which is a town where you learn a lot about crime reporting. And I eventually I went down to Mexico. I lived in Mexico, this is telescoping everything, 10 years. I wrote my first two books, which are fantastic, fantastic books about Mexico and Mexican society and culture, nonfiction. Nobody read them. They're for sale, by the way, on Kindle for $5 each if you are so moved. And I heartily recommend. Anyway, but I came back from Mexico, got a job at the LA Times. I'm from LA. That was my kind of my hometown paper. And it was while I was there that a couple of things happened that I'd never that changed my life. The first was the eruption of the cartel wars that we have since seen ever since 2005, roughly. It was startling. I lived in Mexico as a freelance writer, covering immigration, going to immigrant villages and stuff. That was really where I focused most of my time as a freelancer in Mexico. No one knows what a freelancer is. They don't give you access to the high corridors of power so much. And so my feeling was I'm going to find the stories that nobody else is doing. I got away from Mexico City. And that's what I did. I wrote a lot about immigration. I came back to the LA Times intending mostly to write about Mexico in the United States or Mexico in Los Angeles or California, what have you. Did a lot of that. And along the way, I discovered that there was this new surge in seizures of heroin by the DEA at the border, and I was like, why would? And then people were using more heroin in the United States. I was, why would that be? That made no sense to me. I thought heroin was a drug for the '70s, Serpico and French Connection and all those great New York movies. Why would anybody be getting back into heroin? And the other thing that I realized when I was in Mexico, and I wrote a lot about, was this phenomenon of people in the same town doing the same job. Everybody, and this is the case because um, people in these isolated villages, you don't have access to education. It would allow you to be a campesino's daughter to become a mechanical engineer, for example, right? And so you learn your life's work from those around you. And if those around you are hanging drywall in Indianapolis, you're going to go hang drywall in Indianapolis. If they're in construction in Mexico City, you're going to go work construction in Mexico City. I came upon a story because of my interest in why heroin would be going. It's a long story how I got there, but I came upon a story of a town where everybody in the town comes to the United States to sell heroin, very much like pizza, retail heroin trade, taking orders over the phone and then going to deliver the heroin. And this is what sparked what sparked the book Dreamland, which really told the kind of complete story of the opioid epidemic, the overprescribing of OxyContin and other pain pills by doctors, pushed by pharmaceutical companies, creating a brand new population of opioid addicted Americans, some of which, a significant percentage of which became addicted then to heroin because the narcotic painkillers like hydrocodone, oxycodone are simply chemical cousins. They're all opioids. They're chemical cousins to heroin. I wrote that book thinking actually nobody was ever going to read it because at the time this was 2012, 13, 14, nobody was aware of this problem. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And the families that had loved ones addicted definitely talked about it. And so I wrote this book and then exploded. It was just remarkable. And so you began to see this awareness on the part of politicians, on the media, et cetera, people all across the country, people who were afraid to talk about it because they were ashamed that their loved one was addicted. All of a sudden came out of the shadows into the light, began to tell their stories. So when I was writing Dreamland, there were really no active lawsuits against drug companies. Within a couple of years after Dreamland, it was like a couple hundred, and then eventually it was 3,000. People didn't know how to pronounce the word naloxone, which is kind of the miracle revival drug. You squirt it in a overdosee's nose, and boom, they revive right there. Nobody knew how to even pronounce that word. Nobody knew what an opioid was. If you weren't in medicine, you didn't know what an opioid was, and that's why I had to use in my dreamland the subtitle is "The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic," because nobody knew what an opioid was. So along the way, I began to get all these invitations to come speak, just stunning quantities. And what happened then was I began to watch the next story take place, which is the one we're all dealing with at the local town and county level all across the country, which is the widespread prevalence now of synthetic drugs out of Mexico. So the supply of drugs has shifted from doctors companies to the trafficking world in Mexico, who are making methamphetamine and illicit fentanyl in such quantities because they're synthetic. This is a synthetic era of drugs. We're no longer in the plant era of drugs anymore. Because they're synthetic, there's no seasons. You can make them all year long if you have the chemicals to do so. And that's what led to The Least of Us that your folks, you all have read. And so that is really what got me to where we are now. I'm working at the moment on a very different book, which, but connected in a weird way I was not expecting. But maybe we could talk about that towards the end, Norman, and talk first about whatever people want about the Least of Us and all the rest.
I maybe I'll ask a question just to kick things off. Is what is the link between the downgrading or the removing of opportunities in small communities, even in Mexico and other places, but even let's just say in the heartland of the United States, removing those local opportunities often through excessive regulation or just the diversion of capital away from our smaller communities, and then the spiral into sort of sustained lifestyles that really make it difficult to ever emerge from that.
Right. I think I wrote about that in Dreamland primarily. And yes, the part of the story of our opioid epidemic, in particular, the part where it starts, where the problem really starts, it then spreads because it's really based on supply created by doctors and pharma companies all across the country. It explodes all across the country, but it really starts in Appalachia, Rust Belt neighborhoods that have had a few things happen, mainly job loss. Mm-hmm. Could be factories, steel mills, coal mines, what have you. And then with that, a departure of the people most unwilling to accept that new reality, and they leave for other places. And so one town I wrote about was Portsmouth in the state of Ohio on the Kentucky, on the Ohio River across from Kentucky. And that was definitely the case. It was a town with steel mills and shoe factories that really sustained the town. It was a working class town, bustling main street, really vibrant kind of community. And at the heart of it, sustaining it all, was a swimming pool. It was kind of like the town plaza, and the name of the swimming pool was Dreamland.
Yeah.
The Rust Belt phenomenon sets in, foreign competition. We weren't expecting some for some reason. And the steel mills closed, shoe factories closed. People begin to leave, as they say, a good half the population left. Main Street empties out, and finally they can no longer sustain Dreamland swimming pool, and it is closed and dug up and turned into the saddest looking strip mall you ever saw. And so this was where and what happened was, I thought, the reason I called the book Dreamland after the swimming pool is because what happened to the swimming pool was emblematic of the destruction and the isolation, the destruction of community that I think has gone on all across this country 40 years plus, more, I guess, and it's this isolation, if never have survived as a species, human race would never have survived as a species if we were decided to be as isolated through millennia. We would never have survived if human beings had decided to be as isolated as Americans are today. We'd have been extinct long ago. But we figured in ordinary America, that we could be, right? And we are. And so this has led to all kinds of things. what you then find in some of these areas, and we could talk about this in a minute because I think we're just starting out here, it's true repair of those connections, repair of that community feel in very, very small ways. Non-sexy. This is not making the news. It's not solving the world's problem in some noble, virtuous way. It's just a small towards finding a community again, finding like-minded people, finding then starting micro entrepreneurial. These are not small businesses; they're smaller than small businesses, you know. And through that, though, it is an exciting thing to watch. And I wrote about that in what's happening in Portsmouth is the last chapter in The Least of Us. But the precursor to that chapter is really Dreamland. The whole book is about half of it is about Portsmouth, Ohio. And so I have come to feel very much like the way forward through all of this is to understand that isolation. Understand people thought it was, and this is isolation that could be in middle class and upper middle class neighborhoods. It's not unique to devastated towns and neighborhoods across the country. It is that isolation that needs repair. It's that separation, fragmentation that needs repair, that needs attention. And through that, you begin to develop solutions that when we're isolated, we never thought possible. You come together, and there's this idea that these solutions begin to present themselves in interesting ways that had not occurred when you were doing that. And so, again, to answer your question, part of what was the initial impetus for Dreamland was this whole idea that this is happening in devastated economically devastated, hollowed out communities, and it's true. But then it spread because doctors prescribing these pain pills for ungodly amounts for things they probably never should have prescribed. Some of them all across the country, not just in Appalachia and Rust Belt areas.
Sam, the next book that I'm working on is on economic development.
Yeah.
And on kind of the bottom-up economics. And I have a handful of cities that I want to spend time in and visit. And one of them is Hazard, Kentucky. I know I know it didn't make the book The Least of Us, but you wrote about it later on. And I feel like there's a story here that I think would resonate with our group about Hazard, because there's something very inspiring about its revival. I don't know if you could take a couple minutes and just.
Oh, sure thing. Love to talk about Hazard, Kentucky. Important to keep in mind that my experience, I had never been to Hazard, Kentucky until the spring of 23. What I knew about the town, because I knew many people have been there and knew about it and so on, was that it was the buckle on the opioid belt of Eastern Kentucky, which is, as you may know, was really one of the major places where this opioid problem began. It's a place lots of coal mines and people and all the rest. And so I went there figuring they wanted me to come out there and speak, and I did. And so I get out there, and what I realize is, yeah, that story's true, but remarkable tale unfolding, very much like what's going on in Portsmouth, Ohio, and I'll relate to what I'm talking about to the stuff that your people may have read in The Least of Us. But in Hazard, what you're finding is these smaller than small businesses. These are micro entrepreneurial endeavors. That's what they are. Small businesses starting up, little by little, beginning to find, and people then, like-minded people, energetic people. Sometimes people come in from the outside. Sometimes with local folks coming in from the outside. This idea, like I can make work my business idea that I've always thought. Now, helping in that is the cheap real estate, or sometimes you might say bombed out real estate. Right? Some of these places, are bad buildings. Some of them have, a lot of these buildings, the street will be like gap tooth because some buildings will be completely destroyed because they were in fire. There was a fire or something like that. But you're finding the key in all this is the real estate values. key in all this is the ability of people to see a business, and they begin little as one or two people start, others begin to say, oh, I can do that too. Key also, crucial in all this is the natural raw material that is the recovering addict. For people like energy rising from decay. Addiction is decay. For people in recovery from drug addiction bring in a renewed energy, creativity, gratitude, very important, optimism. They're no longer ripping off the manhole covers to buy dope. They're thinking, what can I do? How can I move ahead? They are grateful that they're not dead. Able to, and they're frequently people are all around them know them, and so they want to show something different. So part of the story of Hazard's rebirth from the buckle of the opioid belt to what it is becoming today is based on the energy trained by people. Sometimes the very business owners themselves are in addiction or in addiction recovery. Okay, I found this first from this woman who started a bookstore in Eastern Kentucky. There has not been a bookstore in Eastern Kentucky like ever. Okay, the closest one is Lexington, UK, where UK is located. And so this woman, 10 years, in recovery from pain pill addiction, made it out of that somehow. She said so many of my friends are dead. Others are still in prison, et cetera, all this kind of thing. She starts a bookstore. Crucial in all this, too, is a renovation of municipal government, the role and attitudes in municipal government. For so long, these towns in decay were bedeviled by horribly dysfunctional municipal government that kind of reflected the decay of the town. Constant recalls, people who had no business being a mayor, didn't really know what they were doing, that kind of thing. So all this and very limited vision. And so as some of those people began to retire, you got a rejuvenation of Hazard municipal government. People who thought, you know what, let's look for new ideas. Let's relearn the job of mayor or city councilman. Right. Let's see. And so they hire a downtown development coordinator, someone whose job is to focus only on helping small businesses start and then thinking, what can we do? This space is empty because there was a building there we knocked down. Well, maybe we can make it a place for lunch trucks, that kind of thing. And so you begin to see the rebirth of a small town in the smallest, non-sexy ways. Which is what appeals to me, because I believe that we have tried too hard to find the big magic answer that solves. That's what the opioid problem was. We are finding a way to solve all human pain through the use of these one pills that we've not been using, and we should be, because now science knows supposedly that they're non-addictive, and we are still living with that bizarre delusional idea that you can solve all human pain with one tool, and that tool is a narcotic pain pill. I believe in the idea of beachheads. I believe in the idea of small steps moving. That's why I called the book The Least of Us. Part of the book, The Least of Us, is because I was reading the Bible. I'm not Christian, but I was reading the Bible during the writing of this. I came upon Matthew, book of Matthew. Jesus says to his disciples, that which you do unto the least of these, my brethren, you do unto me. But I also was, and so that hit me very hard when I was in the middle of writing all this, and I read that, and I was like, damn, that's exactly what I'm trying to get across. But it's also the idea, the least little endeavor actually is not inconsequential. It can form great consequences if you stick with it, if you show up, if it's constant, And then what has happened in Hazard is all these people have found each other, right? They have energy. It is really fascinating to behold, that they then one person does something, other people and they'll help the other person. The other person comes along and goes, yeah. And soon you get this synergy, this energy towards recovery, towards utilizing the best of people's optimism and creativity, which is now available because those folks are in recovery from drug addiction, that kind of thing. And so you see now when I was there, I believe the numbers, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but there was 47 businesses, 100 50 or 170 jobs. I can't remember. It's something like that, right? Now, which means that everyone's, hiring one or two people, three people, But now what you have are these movement in downtown, which was only before home to courthouse, Subway sandwiches, and several bail bondsmen and lawyers. Now you've got and these buildings are being recovered. It's a remarkable thing to watch, and you're seeing all of these people with new ideas, which I just love to watch. Again, people are seeing come together, defeat that isolation, that fragmentation that so bedevils the rest of America. And this is not like a panacea. It's not a cure-all. It's simply a way of saying the way forward is through finding community, which human beings have always needed, always from the caveman days, right? And is that kind of story. It's using that precious new resource, which is the energy and creativity of recovering addicts, helping that push forward this renewed idea that we're finding each other. Before it was so isolated, everyone was strung out. No one wanted to be around anybody else. Now people are coming together and working at that. And that is the story, I think, fascinating, beautiful story of Hazard. And I think you just put a copy of the story that up on your page there. Yeah, feel free to read it. And I'm very encouraged and thrilled to hear that you're using Hazard as an example. That's not the only place, right? There's some other places. I want to write a story next, so you can't take this, Chuck. You have to let me write this first. But I want to write a story about Corbin, Kentucky. They understand. The mayor there told me we used all our COVID relief money to keep our swimming pool. Why? So important. Swimming pools are essential to small towns and neighborhoods. Why? It's solving several things at once. Getting people together, healthy, away from the screens, community feel. The problem is that for small towns, pools are extraordinarily expensive to keep going and then to maintain with periodic repairs and whatnot. What we need, really, if I were president, I swear to God, I would start an enormous endowment to help, not to step in and do it all, but to help small towns and neighborhoods maintain and repair their very costly swimming pools, because swimming pools are a major way of creating community. And so anyway, that's a story I hope to do after this next book I'm finishing up right now as we speak. But go at that Hazard story, man. That's fantastic.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm the community pool thing is really great because I do think it is, Sam, that's a different take. I do think that you're right in the sense that I'm from Minnesota. We don't have community pools in the same way because for 9 months out of the year, it would have to be a community like ice rink or something.
Yeah, right. But I understand.
But I do get, there's a community ice rink that is a block and a half from my house. And the fascinating thing about it is that when you go, you spend more time often in the warming house than you do on the rink. And the warming house is a place where you're chatting up everybody, right? Like you're seeing everybody, you're chatting them up. And it's not necessarily like you're meeting friends that you know, although you do that too. But a lot of times it's, I see a friend, they're talking to someone else, they're like, hey, have you met this person? No. Oh, they live up the block here. And it is we don't have enough of those, in a sense, kind of commons places. And I'm interested in Hazard because I feel like there is what you have described to me and what I got out of the article and then building off the book is this idea that, yes, whatever you do to the least of us, I also think there's a corresponding notion of together we are more than, even the least of us together.
More than the sum of our parts.
It's exactly. And I think, if you take cues from early Christianity or you take cues from I mean, one of the vignettes that I'm looking at with my book is Black Wall Street. And I think Black Wall Street is a story that is given to us today of being a story of racism and what have you. To me, the more fascinating part of the Black Wall Street story is how did a bunch of former slaves with no capital, with no formal education, with no access to other communities, how did they build this prosperous place out of nothing? And the short answer is they did it together. They did it in this kind of humble together way.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful.
Well, I'd be very interested in any parallels or comparisons you find between Hazard today and Tulsa of Black Wall Street of whenever it was, the 1920s or prior to that. Yeah. A couple of things. One of the things that I think is also very important, not just swimming pools, but independent cafes. Independent cafes are almost, I have taken them to be like economic barometer of the health of the economic health of a small town, not the Starbucks state. Okay, this is like people in town forming their own little cafes near the courthouse or whatever it happens to be. The more of those you have means the more that there's an economic robustness. People finding each other, people meeting, doing. That's the office away from home, or the office away from the office, right? It's a place where people come out, and that's one of the things in Hazard. Now they have an independent cafe. I think they could use 2 or 3 more, frankly. Portsmouth is also that. Portsmouth has 2 new cafes that one is a beautiful one, very nice outside, and it was the first place. It was opened as I was finishing Dreamland, so 2014 or something like that. It's the first time Portsmouth had a place to see each other in public constantly through the week, other than Walmart. After Dreamland closed, Walmart was it. Okay, and then this comes along, and I think independent cafes. The other thing I think is important, and I want to talk about the ice rink in just a minute, but the other thing I think is important is a renovation of municipal government with people who are looking to be kind of activists, not in an bearing way, but understand that the job of a mayor now in a lot of these small towns is to help small businesses survive, find new places when they flood, that kind of thing. So it's a transformation. This was a transformation totally of economic development models from years ago that perhaps older politicians in the area subscribe to, which is we need to make our community safe or good for or a big shopping mall or a big fact. No, this is about finding ways of making our community better for the people who live there, believing that then they will ignite different and energies. And that is what's happened in Hazard. It's also what's happened in Portsmouth. So you get this renovation of political mindset, looking for grants, looking for ways of using this place here, not to say we need to make this safe for Walmart, but to say we need to make this safe for Doe to start their thing, even though it may fail. But the job of mayor now is to prevent that. I would say with regard to the swimming pools, I did not know this, being from California, but my wife's from the Midwest, and she said, after I wrote about it, she said, you really need to understand how important swimming pools are to so many communities that are far from the ocean or lakes or whatever. And I really did. What brought me back, so after I wrote Dreamland, I was thinking, and I was writing The Least of Us, and about this horrible scourge of fentanyl and meth, synthetic drugs coming out of Mexico, people dying, people driven mad by meth. I thought, maybe I should get back to Portsmouth, because the last chapter in Dreamland was how about the town was slowly in the faintest glimmers of recovery. And I said, I'm seeing that. I want to write about that. So the last 30 pages of Dreamland are about how this town is coming back. Least of us. I said, I got to get back to Dreamland and see what's going on. And so I called up a guy who I had several sources there still. And I called this guy, you know what we're doing, man? You got to come up before Christmas. We are starting our own temporary skating rink. It used to be when the town was actually functional, the town would spray water on a park when it the temperatures reach freezing levels, and people would skate there. But there's been years since we were able to do that. The town could not get its act together, to do that ever again, and so we stopped. So now what they did in this vacant lot, of which there are several, they start this skating rink, and the problem is nobody in Portsmouth knows how to skate anymore because they stopped with the thing, with the spraying of the water. And so what you find is all these people skating and people falling on their butts, but it is gorgeous. It is beautiful. It is like this small thing just come out of the wood. The trees. This is near Christmas, so all the trees have lights wrapped around them, and you get Bing Crosby singing "The Weather Outside is Frightful" and all that stuff, and you get the fried Oreos and all that stuff, and you get people coming out and having a great old time. And so, the last I heard, the town had actually purchased the skating rink, and now they do it every year. But that was my beginning of seeing Portsmouth beginning to really move beyond and really get into this recovery mode. Very, very important.
Sam, that's fascinating because Amanda Page is a Strong Towns member. She's also a documentary maker that has created a documentary about the emergence of Portsmouth and even understanding how people view their own community. I'll try to find a link for it, but there's a really fascinating question here that Jonathan has dropped in the chat as well around the individualistic nature of addiction. Your fifth chapter talks about the fact that a lot of the treatment methods even are almost addictive in their own right, as in they're very resource dependent, very consumptive in that way, in the effort to try to address this, but have at times perhaps taken the place of previous organizations and entities like churches that would have provided a lot of that support, but not done so in a sort of one-on-one sequestered way, but much more in the sense of, hey, I noticed you didn't show up at church in the last 3 weeks. What's going on? What's happened with some of that social fabric, but also how does that address maybe some of the deep sort of the significant headwinds that our communities are facing when we think about treatment and supporting people that are emerging out of addiction?
Yeah, I would say that is a great question. That part of the problems of addiction treatment in that isolation that we suffer from, I think, all across America, and so we don't have that ability. That would take care of a lot if we still had that feeling of being together in a sense that I believe we've done a lot to lose. But yeah, so you have. First of all, it's important to understand too that the opioid epidemic created. We had never understood addiction as well as we do today. We still don't fully understand it, but it's night and day compared to say 15 years ago, right? And 20 years ago, and so and even before that, for goodness sake. And so we just have we had these ideas that kind of informed addiction recovery. That first of all wasn't all that necessary, and second of all, jail was the best place for people and this kind of thing. Now, what I think we're finding is, and so when this opioid thing happened, that along with new insights in neuroscience about how the brain works and how drugs affect the brain, made it so that we rethought a lot. And the idea then became no more jail. Treatment is it. The problem is that this is a problem rooted in the central nervous system, and that is the most mysterious organ in our body. As mysterious as the universe, the more we know about the universe and the central nervous system, the less we know. Kind of, you know what I mean? And it's just this vast thing. We tried then to go treatment only. Needed more treatment infrastructure, but it was a rush. There was a rush to beginning, and I'd say not long after the book came out. Honestly, it's when I began to see it anyway. After Dreamland came out, when you began to see all these new things, and Portsmouth got huge quantities of that. All of that Ohio River Valley, because of the bombed out nature of the communities, frequently the cheap real estate got filled in with treatment centers, and so you got a lot of that there now. The problem is, of course, there's not much. Some are very good, not so good, and some have no business being in business at all. Business being in a business at all. So, we needed that infrastructure. We needed new treatments, but we also understand that, again, like we should have learned with the opioid thing, you cannot treat something rooted in the central nervous system, like pain. Treat it with one tool, like addiction. You cannot treat it with one tool. So we tried with addiction, we tried with criminal justice. We'll just throw everybody there. And then we said, no, we can't do that. So now we're going to treat everybody. Well, you can't arrest everybody out of this problem. You cannot treat out of this problem either. And so that's why in The Least of Us, I try, and I would say I would now after 3 years after it's come out, there's several other things I probably would have added if I had to write it over again, but I wrote it what I had at the time. And that is that the best response is a community response. It is not using one tool. It's not using law enforcement. It's not using treatment. It's saying all of that together. So I write about the jail in Kenton County, Kentucky, where they have jail. Very, very important. Rethinking jail, because jail is a place where people have always gone to be. It's already there. You don't need to build it. And so they've rethought jail as a place of recovery. But then, and there's a lot of that in the book. But then there's also this continuum of care that lasts 3 years after someone's released from jail, where helping people reintegrate into life. And to me, that is it's the understanding and importance of community and community resources that are out there but just dormant. People are not willing to volunteer. They're not willing to get involved when they don't see a point. Now they see a point, and in Kenton County in Kentucky with this jail problem, they're like coming out. They come out of the woodwork. It's a remarkable idea of leveraging community assets that are there, just dormant. Same with addicting addicts in recovery, right? You find the energy that is there that you think can't possibly exist, and then in recovery it does. It comes out again. So.
When it strikes me that and I don't want to oversimplify it, but people can live more with pain than they can live with despair. Like you can live with chronic pain, people can have, and our ancestors, folks that fought in the war and were never the same afterwards, and yet return to communities or return to places where they were greeted and welcomed and embraced and even sort of like accommodated in their new struggles. And yet to live with persistent despair, even in a prison setting or in a setting of just abandoned communities, feeling no opportunities is really powerful. I want to take one more question just from our members, and then Sam, I do want to leave you time to talk about the next book.
Sure.
But any core questions either that emerged out of the material that we read together, or all right.
You're asking if anyone else has another question?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got hundreds, and Chuck, I'm sure you do as well, but I do want to give an opportunity.
I want to ask one that's not in the book, but right. I think is interesting. There's all this buzz about Ozempic now being this drug that will, I have obviously heard about the weight loss part of it, but I think Ozempic was originally pursued as a way to decrease cravings for people who are struggling with addiction. I have this immediate reaction to the idea of we still are trying to find the one drug that fixes all the problems. I don't know if you had that reaction though, and I don't know if
I did.
I do.
Okay. I'm very suspicious of drugs that will solve all our problems. Now, I don't know about Ozempic. I know I've been so busy with this other book that I really have it's come out of nowhere, and I'm like, okay, I'll find out about it later when I had time to do this. So anything I say about Ozempic, I'm happy to be corrected on. But I guess I would say just generally, in the history of opioids, every drug that turned out to be addictive was promoted first as non-addictive. Heroin, when it was first invented in Germany in the late 1800s, was thought to be non-addictive. Dilaudid thought to be non-addictive. OxyContin was promoted as non-addictive. Thing that solves all of humankind's problems, I just think, is a little bit like a Pandora's box. Honestly, I don't believe that we function well with all our problems solved. No tension, no friction in life. I just don't think human beings do well under those circumstances. You know what I mean? So I don't know enough about Ozempic to comment intelligently on it, and I won't. I just that's my poor feeling. Like, God, I don't know, man. We'll
Can I have
see.
two
We'll
quotes?
see. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a, pharmacist and whatever. I don't know all this, but I'm suspicious of any time someone says this is all that we need.
Yeah, me too. I
Yeah.
got two quotes from today now. You can live with chronic pain more than you can live with chronic despair. I think that's a great insight, Norm.
Yeah.
We don't do well with all our problems solved for us. I think is another
I think we need that
really powerful.
friction.
You do, and this gets a little bit to like Taleb's, Nassim Taleb's insights on anti-fragile. There is a point where you have too many problems and they'll break you, right? But
Right.
there's the opposite problem where you have no problems and then you don't become fully human, right? There is a in between there that if we try to take it away, actually solve something or create some problem.
I think so, and I think that's part of you see people arguing over today. I think part of it is we're so prosperous. You see people making problems of minutia, and I want to get into the details because it has to do with the last election and everything. But you like, how is that an important issue?
Right?
Did you come up with that as your important issue? To me, that it's like you got nothing else to worry about. That's probably what it is. So anyway, yeah.
Sam, we would love to have you talk about your next book to whet the appetite for a further discussion that we can set up with you. Why don't we take the time?
Okay.
I'm clocking some of our answers are about 10 minutes each. So I was like, all right, we've got to make sure we land the plane roughly at the top of the hour. I know, God, some folks that'll have to step away, but tell what are you working on? What excites you? And maybe as you close also, what gives you hope?
I talk too much. I'm too long-winded about some of this stuff. So sorry. Some of these things shouldn't take 10 minutes to answer. But so anyway, I finished these two books here, right? And it's a dozen years working on the issue of drug addiction, people's search for their own demise. It's a tough topic to write about for so long. And when I finished The Least of Us, I said I don't want to write another book about drugs. I become a journalist not to write about because the world's fascinating. There's so much to write. I want to write now about people who are finding the ability to finding fulfillment through what they create with them. So not buying happiness from some substance or some iPhone or some damn thing, but finding that wherewithal within them to create. And so it's a weird topic. I'm going to tell you, and you'll think this when I tell you, but I began to write. I've written a book. It's almost done about the tuba. The tuba is. I got into it because when I was living in LA, I come in from Mexico. I did two stories about the tuba in Mexican LA. Right, Mexican LA tuba is huge. Tuba is king. Trumpet players. I did not expect that to be the topic, nor did my wife. Okay, so exactly, but he'll explain why. So the tuba's king down there. I wrote these two stories, and then after that, when as a journalist, I know if you find subculture where people are really something for the deep love of it, not because they get famous or wealthy, but because they really love it, you will find great stories. I know this to be true from years and years of doing journalism. And so I began to interview tuba players, and I've interviewed probably most of the top tuba players in America today. I've interviewed, and why? Well, because again, I like writing about people who are finding that fulfillment. But also, as time went on, I realized, well, I was not expecting, but this is kind of what happened as I got into it. I realized that the tuba is the opposite of addiction. Addiction is about enslavement to a substance, finding happiness by buying something. It's about extinguishing that precious breath of life. Tuba is about nurturing that precious breath of life. Addiction is about alienating everybody around you. If only people you matter to you, or people can help you find drugs. Tuba is about enhancing the community. It's building community. A band cannot be a band without the tuba. Marching band cannot function. Orchestra cannot function without the tuba. Plus, the tuba is about developing that beautiful breath of life, right? That you need, that we all need to live. It's about collaborating with others. You cannot function without others on well, in any instrument, but certainly the tuba. And it's something that nobody ever got rich or famous for playing the tuba. And so when you do it, when you devote your life to it, it's because you love it. And so I set out to just write a bunch of stories about tuba players, man. It's called The Perfect Tuba, finding fulfillment in the time from tuba and band, because I also write about marching band. It's the same thing. Marching band is the community, is the sustenance, is the place where you build sustaining values that sustain community. Marching band is an amazing force for that. All across the country, we're so lucky to have marching band in our high school. Much more important than sports, in my opinion. Although sports are very important. I played basketball in high school. I know the importance of sports, but so it's the perfect tuba, finding fulfillment. Tuba was it the bass horn and band and hope and hard work. That's too long, perhaps, but whatever. And so the idea is to write about the antidote, our hyper consumer, mass marketed crud that is inundates us constantly with quote unquote food, ultra processed food, pornography, video games, smartphones, and apps that are just so addictive. It is the opposite of addiction. And it is a force, not the force, of course, a force, both tuba and band are a force in creating community, creating those attitudes and values that are so important in community. For example, collaboration, patience, focus, devotion, sacrifice, postponing gratification. All of this goes into creating a great band, creating a great tuba player. And band directors and tuba players are like twins when you get down to it. And also they are finding fulfillment, not from the promise of fame and wealth, not from buying something, but from what they are creating from within and developing, and in spite of failure, moving through failure. So all of that became this next book, which is out next fall. And I know this is a weird ass topic to write about.
I'm so excited.
That's the best I got. I thank you, Chuck. That's sweet of you, man.
This is what I spent part of my week doing this week. Was there's a jam band here in the art center, and they asked me to come, and they were recording a few tracks this week, and they're like, we need a drummer. So I showed up and did my thing, and you know what? You can talk to people in the hallway, and you can chat with them in the art center, and you can get to be friends. But to actually lay down a track with someone and share a vision and like, okay, how do you want this to sound? And all right, let me play a track that will fulfill what your dream of this song is supposed to be, and then to nail it to where they're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want. It is a deep connection. Music is such a pathway to connection.
It is.
It really is. Yeah.
And I think
awesome.
the tuba is different because, the rock guitar players came garbed in this rebel chic.
Mm-hmm.
They're like rebels, stuff like this. Yeah, I play the guitar. I love that idea too. I dig it. But tuba players are the real purists when it comes to sacrificing and devotion to your art, because they're doing without that. They're doing without. It's a socially disparaged kind of instrument frequently. And kids in high school, normally boys, it's frequently boys, are those who are kind of or marginalized or bullied or whatever. They find that something precious within them, and then when they play with others, it's almost like a drug, except for it's not. The feeling of euphoria you get, and I think you just described a little bit of that.
Absolutely.
But you get there very different from drugs. Drugs is about easily finding something that gives you a nuclear blast of euphoria. Music, and the tuba in particular, is about working through failure relentlessly for a lot of years to get to a point where you have a brief moment of sublime contentment and euphoria playing with other people, but it doesn't last long. And you've already learned these very essential values of hard work, patience, focus, all of that kind of stuff. It's a different instrument than, say, the most popular ones like piano, violin, guitar, trumpet, all the other ones. Tuba requires like a certain, almost a punk. I was very into punk rock when I was in college. Still, I love punk rock. I listen to it all the time. But it's a very punk rock kind of instrument because it's all about you going out and trying and learning how to create something on your own, which is all punk rock to me. Just saying you're gonna do this no matter if you sound bad or not, and go out there and very independent rebel spirit. All that is to me beautiful stuff, community building stuff, and hence why I'm telling you about it, and
I'm
also
psyched.
because I want you all to go out and buy 5 copies when it comes out.
This is my my top on my reading list for next year already now. So I'm super excited.
Good. Thank you. The other thing, one last thing is about tuba players. It's very difficult to make a living at it. And so what you find is the world is covered with tuba players. It's unbelievable numbers of tuba players are out there, but who had to give it up because, it's very difficult to make a living playing the tuba. Anyway, I will definitely send you guys galleys, and when it comes out, maybe like it'll probably be over the summer when the galleys are ready. I'm literally, Chuck and Norm, I am right now 48 hours from turning this manuscript in and just saying, well, done.
Yeah.
Tuba, perfect tuba. Let's see how it goes. And
how are your tuba lessons going?
No, I do not play the tuba. And the other thing is too, it's called the perfect tuba. One last thing, because in the history of human innovation of musical instruments, we have only developed 2 perfect tubas. They're both owned by the Chicago Symphony. They have both been people tried to copy these things for years, never been able to do it. The part of this book is about those tubas owned by, again, the Symphony in Chicago, and these 2 guys attempting to recreate the perfect tuba, and whether or not they do is something I'll leave for later. But
I am giddy about this book. So
and it's weird, man. You know what is weird? Here's weird. I will give these talks about fentanyl and methamphetamine, right?
Yeah.
And then people will ask me at the end, like a Q&A kind of thing. So what's your next book? And I'm not kidding you, man. I will go off on what I just told, all that I just told you right there.
Yeah.
There will be silence, dead silence. No one will move. No one will be monkeying with their phones. Like, shit. You know what I mean? So anyway, sorry for the vulgarity there. But anyway, awesome. So that's what I'm doing next.
Fantastic. Sam, this has been awesome. I loved it because, kind of like what you said, you had worked on very serious issues, very serious topics, but what pulses through this, even before we got to talking about your next book, is just the life. And this was a life-giving conversation in so many different ways. We covered pools, we covered tubas, we covered so many other things. Thank you for making time in your day for this. And we will continue to reach out. Sam's website, I will link to that if you want to reach out to him directly, or reach out on any of the social platforms as well that he's on. And thank you so much, everybody that's been a part of our Strong Towns membership. And especially as we wrap up our member week, it's just awesome to be able to conclude this with, I think, almost a perfect session with you, Sam, because it's one, grappling seriously and I would say creatively with some of the deep problems that we face. Kind of grappling with the fact that, like, maybe what we're trying to do is make things just a little less worse, but then turning and realizing that through community and in league with others, we can, like you said, unleash the creative potential of places from people that seem least likely to be able to offer anything, and yet are that heart and that beating opportunity within our community. So with that, thank you.
Wonderful.
Continue in your work.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate your time.
Really love Strong Towns. Loved it long before Chuck and I ever talked. So keep up what y'all are doing, and thank you very much for sharing my book and this time with y'all. So nice of you.